I want to begin by thanking Dr. Tsoutos for and the Technical University for the invitation to uh, to for the invitation, to give the speech. I just want to say that this speech is given by me as a practitioner. I'm no professor or anything like that, but I am a practitioner and involved in the technology transfer for 25 years. So these are observations and knowledge accumulated over the years on that subject. The title is The Role of Technology Transfer Office in bridging academia with the market. And by market, we mean the private market, and as you will see in during the speech, the private market, and as well as the public and social segments of our society, with public administrators, public entities that they can use technologies, and social enterprises or social entities that can also benefit from research results. There is in this talk, because it's a generic uh, talk about technology transfer office, there are not many references specific to the cultural heritage, even though cultural heritage is included in the technologies that can be supported by the technology transfer office. So, uh, going on to the context of this discussion, we have six chapters, six segments. One is talking about innovation, then the technology transfer, then the operation of technology transfer, and fourth, the financing of technology transfer projects, leading up to the operation of the technology transfer office and some tools and guides that we use for that. Starting with innovation, this is one of the best I've ever seen slides that contain a holistic approach of what commercialization of innovation is about. And you have the market trends that actually generate customer needs or society needs, if you want to call it. From the other side, you have the researchers, where they who they produce all the time new technologies, and it has been like that for forever, and they provide new technology. And then you have the dynamics of new technology trying to find itself into the market, and at the same time, concurrently, you have the needs of the market being transferred to the research world in order to sensitize it for needs that need to be met, therefore to provide new technologies for that. This is the innovation space, as we call it, between those two. And you need to keep all the time in mind that we have the push and pull dynamics that connect the producers with the users of the technology. This whole process takes us to commercialization, which again can be for the private market money and sales, or can be products for social uses. Here is an example of a strategy for the Technology Transfer Office. This is taken from the Technical University of Crete, and you can see the map of how research can be exploited and used in the market or in society. and that we have recognized both innovation pull and innovation push as the dynamics in this thing. This is credited primarily to Professor Grinis, who was who had the concept for this strategic plan. Now, we are in the innovation segment, innovation sources. It is very useful to understand that innovation is produced from basic research and then to applied research and then to development of products or service, which in any case we will discuss again later. At the end, we have the commercial production and marketing, which means that if some technology have reached this stage, then it's a complete product and it goes to the uses. One important component is to understand that public funding is, for a big part, responsible to support basic research. That's why most of universities in the world and research institutions are public institutions.
It's 12:30.
We also have contract research, which is private money that they go either to applied research level or to development of a product or service level, where private money are responsible for the funding of those stages. Commercial production and marketing is usually only private. Why we have innovation? What is the value of innovation in the economy? First of all, is the technological advances, as we said, plus the requirements of the market that drives it. We have new possibilities all the time and new features that affect production, consumption, health, communication, education, and all that. And in effect, innovation changes people's lives, which means that it's so important that we cannot not know it, support it, and benefit from it. The impact of it's huge on entrepreneurship and competitiveness at every level, from individual to global. And there is an important value chain that we need to understand in terms of economics for the research results, and that is innovation leads competitiveness. Competitiveness is the name of the game in our day and age, which, when successful, leads to development and the increase of the national product, which means that our country or our region is getting better compared to others. And we live in a competitive world, so we need it as much as we need oxygen. Now, innovation is usually characterized by two major characteristics. Marginal or incremental innovation is the innovation that improves something that already exists, is the incremental betterment of something, either being a product or a service or whatever else, as we will see later. Now, it can also reconfigure an existing technology for another purpose. If that exists as a condition, then you have marginal or, as we call, incremental innovation. On the other hand, radical or disruptive innovation is called breakthrough or discontinuing innovation, is an innovation that displaces existing technology. In other words, when we had the cars and the trains, then all horse buggies and carriages are displaced. A whole market disappears. And usually this new technology creates new markets. It is a clear departure from the existing technology and non-existing methods. And as Christensen called it, disruptive technology has a potential to upset an organization's or an industry's existing business model. In other words, if a technology, an existing technology faces disruptive alternative, then that is, it changes its business model, or either it adapts or it disappears. The I like this definition of innovation. It is the embodiment, combination, or synthesis of knowledge in original, relevant, valued new products, processes, or services. It is one of the best definitions I've seen. Now, what is innovation really? Innovation is two things. One is the idea generation, and the other is the opportunity recognition. Idea generation is usually a technical insight, like Mrs. Parangatidou said, it's a technical improvement, something technical. From the wheel up to new softwares, this is technical insights that created the product. No, there is no apparent commercial application. At that point, the money generating dimension is not very clear. And although researchers do have an idea of where it can be used. And sometimes, and this is technology pull, if you want, it is a problem, an existing problem, or an existing opportunity inspires the insight. In other words, the insight doesn't come from the inventor's head, but it comes from some needs coming from the market. The other important component of innovation is the opportunity recognition. It means that the researchers are able to recognize the value for the user or the customer, either being social, cultural, economic, or whatever. Now, these two components are necessary for every innovation to exist. Now, the value chain now for making an idea to go to be useful in the market, there are basic four steps, idea generation being one, opportunity recognition is the second, and that's where the idea is evaluated. This is a stage where the idea is examined for its merits as a good alternative or a better alternative or even a disruption to existing markets. Then if it's recognized as useful, then it goes to development, and we'll talk about development in a couple of slides, and then it goes to commercialization. It's at a stage that it can be useful in the market. Another way of looking at it, this four-step process, is the 4Ds. It's an innovative way of looking at it. We start with the stage of discovery, which is the first stage, the ideation stage. And there we have the new ideas proposed. Then we go to to identify, the merits of the idea in terms of feasibility and potential impact. And then if that the evaluation is positive, then we go to the next step, which is the development, where we produce prototypes and we see how it works in real terms. And then we have the final stage when all these stages have been completed successfully, then the idea is ready to go to the market and be useful and create value, monetary and of utility. Now, the Technology Transfer Office, in order to be able to assist really the producers of innovation, which is in case of universities, the researchers, the professors, and the students engaged in research, we need to identify very well the sources, because the idea is an inspiration, an accident, or something else. And here we can see where we can generate or how we can generate ideas that can be useful. One is new knowledge, is the progression of research, as we said before, from basic research to applied research that creates new knowledge. And new knowledge, really new knowledge, mostly is for radical innovations, which of course they take long to go to the market, but they have considerable rewards. In other words, we have greater impact. Users and customers is another source of ideas, as we mentioned before, in the technology pool context, that a Harvard book called it an evergreen source of innovation ideas, which means that customers and users are one of the primary sources of idea generations to achieve new innovation. However, customers and users, they are simpler people. They are not, by definition, requested to generate ideas. They only can say the problems and challenges they face with existing technologies. But if you ask them of what could be better, they are limited in their knowledge that they have, which is the knowledge of existing ideas, and therefore they are not the best source for disruptive innovations. They're not the best, they cannot see away from the box. And that's why users and customers are primarily sources of marginal innovation, whereas new knowledge is primarily the source of radical innovations. Not that these are exclusive. Lead users are individuals or companies that their needs is ahead of the market, and they need new innovation for them in order to operate. So it is estimated that more than 50% of innovations are produced from this kind of a small number of specific lead users that can be a great source of new ideas. Empathetic design are innovators who observe how people use existing products in day-to-day life. Dr. Greenis before mentioned participatory design. This is when properly thinking innovation companies and groups, they are very sensitive, not only in the knowledge that they own, they create themselves, but also of the simple everyday users of existing technologies and products, services, whatever that is. And the observations are very good raw materials for new innovative ideas. A good example is Harley Davidson, that they have this kind of people with the bikers, and when they see what the bikers do on their bikes, they understand the features that the bikes should have in the future in order to cover all the needs of the customers. Now, the problem of tyranny of served markets is also present in companies. Big companies, uh, uh, especially when they are successful, they they gain, they take the benefits of the success, and they're not actually actively and effectively looking for new innovations. And that's why, in order for companies to break this limitation, when there are new technologies to be tested in the market, they create what they call invention factories or skunk works in separate places away from the main operations of the company, to go and isolate those innovators with the new ideas in a separate place that they leave them to to develop the new products. And that way they simulate the startup mentality, which we'll discuss a little bit later, and the setup of a startup where you are not limited by existing or related operations. Normally, at corporate level, these invention factories aim at radical innovations. At business level, for the big companies that they have business levels, these are for incremental innovations. But the isolated talent is definitely is helped to focus on the new inventions in these settings. And then you have the open market, open innovation, that is the idea which we will discuss a little bit later with some graphs, that there are innovations that not necessarily need to be done in this place, even though we are in the market of those potential innovations. So you can have innovations being sold or bought in the market, or provide, or strategic alliances can be formed in order to better exploit new inventions in the market. That is a way that existing limitations from a particular company or source of innovation is not limited to that. You've seen before those inventors, famous inventors, but here I wanted to bring the point up that Thomas Edison said, that invention is 90% perspiration and 1% only inspiration. In other words, there is really a lot of work to be done. And if you take it even further, imagine, the pharmaceutical industry, where you have so much money to be invested in clinical research and all that, that you can understand why 99% perspiration, and in economic terms, these are investments, need to be invested in order for innovation to occur. Another facilitator for innovation, of course, is what Louis Pasteur said: the chance favors the prepared mind. In other words, innovations are achieved by those that have been preparing themselves for that. The second part of innovation, the second component, as we said it, is opportunity recognition, which is the mental process that answers a question that every innovator must ask. Does this idea represent a real value to current or potential customers or users in general? The question is very important because opportunity is equal to the realization of real value for those that will use the technology. A short way to check that is to answer three questions. Does the innovation have a strategic fit with the company? Now, the Harvard books, they talk about companies. In the case of producers of innovations, such as universities and research institutions, the strategic fit is synonymous to its existence. So yes, for universities, there is a strategic fit because that's what they do. They produce innovation. Or besides teaching people, they also produce innovation. Do you have technical competencies? Yeah, the technical competence required to make it work. In the case of academia, yes, it is. They have the technical innovations, but up to a point, as we will show in a few minutes. And the business competencies to make it successful in the market, the real answer is probably not. Why? Because the researchers, by definition, are not businessmen. So they are not, if they wanted to be businessmen, they would be. So they, by definition, lack business acumen in order to be successful in the market, but they nevertheless try. And then you see often that professors, they participate in spin-offs and from the universities that they take up, the second boat. They sit on two boats, like they say, one in the university as a professor and a producer of technology, and at the same time on the other boat as a developer of new technology to go to the market and act as businessman. A second, more complicated way to recognize the opportunity is to put it into the test of these six utility levers and the six stages of buyer experience cycle. And for answering questions of productivity, simplicity, convenience, risk, run and image, environmental friendliness. And in terms of the buyer experience, the purchase, delivery, use, segments, maintenance, and disposal. It's a complicated thing, and it's a job usually done by people that they have a sense of the market. That's why it is part of the development process. And that brings us to the development of a product, of a technology to go to the market. This is a funnel that we will see again a bit later. The new ideas are coming, as we said before, from the ideation process and the opportunity recognition, and then they go to the funnel to be developed. In the funnel, we need to recognize two stages. One is the stage where the work is being done to develop further the features of the technology to become a product, service, or whatever. And then you have at some point a gate where decision is made whether this is going well, or if not, the things change or the technology is dropped. This is a daily thing that many people are obliged to do when they see that the technology is not going anywhere. When I say many people, professors and researchers in the universities, they go through that process, and they then know very well whether some of their ideas have future or not, and they perform it within their lab or the research group. And that affects, of course, the research planning. Same thing with the companies that they develop new technologies. Of course, this process is repeated continuously until it goes to the end, where the product is fully developed and then goes to the market. And as long as we go along this process, then the criteria of pass or go, or pass or no pass, is increasing, of course, because at the end you want to have a good working product or service or process that can be well received in the market, of course. Now we have two slides listing the types of innovations as that they are recognized, even though we can have different ways of looking at them. One is the business model innovation, and that is how a company or an entity makes its money, in other words. And innovation can change the business model. This is evident on on disruptive technologies that you can see it being changed if the company is smart enough and wise enough to adapt. Otherwise, it will close. Marketing innovation is what the word says, that there are improvements in the product, the design, the promotion, and stuff like that. Organizational innovation is when there are transformations in the business structures, the practices, the models, the way they're approaching the market, and all that. Process innovation is the application of a new way of production or order fulfillment, and Netflix being one of the best examples. They were second or third in the market in the Western United States at the point of when Blockbusters and others were ahead in these little shops of renting cassettes and DVDs. And then when Netflix engaged streaming, they changed the market, and we don't hear about Blockbuster anymore. Everybody uses Netflix nowadays. Product innovation is the most understandable innovation by everybody is the new product, a new product that can do. And the best example is the mobile phone. The mobile phone that when it became mobile, it was a radical innovation. And then you have mobile phones being improved, which is not a radical innovation, it's a marginal innovation. iPhone 12 to iPhone 13 is only some innovations, some marginal innovations that make the difference. Service innovation is the other great and well understood type of innovation. That is when we don't have a product, but we have a service that can be done in another way. And finally, supply chain innovation is also the type of innovation that affects supply chain either in retail or in wholesale markets. And that brings us to the second segment, which is what is technology transfer? Technology transfer is a collaborative use among cooperating knowledge entities or facilities. And it's not a surprise why usually innovation is created in educational environments where there are labs and equipment that they measure the innovation of each idea. It's also a process through which technology or knowledge developed in one place is applied and utilized in another place or for another purpose. And technology or knowledge transfer from one unit to other aims to improve the efficiency of the recipient's activities. I remind you here that an innovation to be useful needs to improve the situation of the recipient. In other words, it has to have value for this segment that will use the technology. Technology transfer is also the process of using technology, expertise, know-how, and facilities for a purpose not initially fully determined by the organization developing it. And here, this is maybe counterintuitive because one thinks that the technology generated by a researcher aims somewhere. Applied research is normally understood as being serving a goal, and that goal is some kind of a formulation of a target where the innovation should reach and serve some segment in the market. But because innovation is something that is a dynamic thing and can serve many things at the same time, there is a very good example that I kept here to tell you about Giuseppe Marconi, who invented the radio waves. His intentions in 1890 it was to have wireless telegraphy, the SOS systems. And from 1990, even they used it a lot in the Titanic, and they saved so many lives, and it was such a big thing. But the real commercial potential for his invention was not the SOS communication or wireless telegraphy. It was the radio. The radio, after in 1922, became the real purpose, which was not initially fully determined when he developed the wireless telegraphy. And that took 32 years for the final purpose and the very useful purpose to be realized and to be effected. So technology transfer can result in new commercial exploitation or an improvement of product or a service. Now, there are 3 slides here for the process. And then here we examine, by just naming them, the types of technology transfer. How technology transfer goes from one place, which is the producer, to the other place who is some kind of a recipient. The first one is informal discussion, is when we go to a cafe and we discuss about things. Then you can have research results reaching some kind of intended or unintended recipient in a very informal way. Another way of transferring knowledge is official dissemination or promotion, such as the conferences where we have people announcing and explaining the research results and the achievements that they have done in their own work for innovative products or services. And that announcement, like Mrs. Panagiotidou said, kills the potential protection of the new innovation of the innovation because it is being published. Official exchange of non-patentable intellectual property. This is official exchange of non-patentable intellectual property is when somebody that has a knowledge transfers it to the other one in order for him to do his work, but that knowledge is not patentable. And software code is an example. The fourth way is licensing of patents from university and national laboratories to the private sector. Here you see the licensing of patents is the recognition of the value at some point that the producers of the invention or the innovation did, and they went through the steps that Ms. Panagiotidou explained before, and at that point they protected their knowledge and they offer it through a licensing. In other words, with a fee for the users. Cooperative or collaborative R&D is a very common way of developing new products and services and processes and all that between university and state laboratories with the private sector. This is usually is contracts, where in the contracts it is important to recognize that you have a group of people working together to develop a new innovation, but each one brings into the consortium previous knowledge. So those contracts that we're talking about here are the contracts that they have to recognize what technologies and knowledge each part brings into the process. So when they create something new, the relative attention has to be paid with what each one started in the process. So that's a very technical and legal challenge in these collaborative ways. And another point for this collaborative way of generating new knowledge is that you have producers and potential users working together. In other words, maximizing the ingenuity of the producers with the application knowledge people, which are the companies that they will market the innovation after. In other words, you bring together both sources of knowledge required for a successful new innovation. The sixth one is utilization of state-funded research facilities. This is a way of transferring technology when you offer public facilities to be used by private sector. It's a new way of accelerating the process in the market in order to solve particular problems. And that is determined by the type of research facilities that they are offered for common use. The next one is technical and technological assistance from technology providers. This is not necessarily a private thing, but it's a contract, a patentable way, but it's a contract from that helps technology providers to help private sector to solve a problem. When you have people, working on your car, then they solve a problem for you, and they are at that point transfer knowledge. The exchange of scientific research personnel between producers like universities and the market, that is also another way of transferring technology. And this is lately even used in Greece, but not to a great extent. Last but not least is the initiation of small companies based on state-funded research, spin-offs from the universities, spin-outs from businesses, and the startups, which they are, new companies that they start something anew with, usually young people with ideas that they want to develop further. And with that, we go to the operation of technology transfer and see the stages it takes to go from for a product to for an idea to become a product. And these are the stages, as we mentioned before. You will find many different ways of depicting this involvement, this value chain. Don't stick yourself into that. There are stages, and that's the important thing. At the beginning of the process, when you have the idea, you're at the point of creation of opportunities, of understanding possibilities, and having a big number of choices to be made, because you have the biggest variety in terms of where you're going to go next. Going up on research on the general idea and the proof of concept, and then implementation, where you study the possibility of going to the market, and then if it's possible, if it's deemed possible, then you go to the next, which is the development and then the commercialization. During the process, you have from the big number of opportunities at the beginning, you have an increase in certainty, an increase in the knowing where you go, and the rigorous, let's say, criteria have they need to be satisfied in order to go to market, because the product, the technology is going is deemed to be useful, to be okay to go to the market. You have at the same time significant risk reduction as compared to the beginning. So you have a variety of options that goes down, and at the same time, another component of this process is that you have increased cost and investments. And this is something that normally interferes with the ownership of the technology. Because when a technology needs a lot of investment to be a lot of investment to go to the market, then the developers are required to partner one way or the other. One way being the licensing, or the other way is to relinquish some of their ownership of the property, and then the investor puts the money to make it a product, and then at that point, the relative weight of the ownership of the original inventor diminishes, and the investment is a big influencer, if you want, on the patentability or the expected income from the patent of the original investor. This is something a bit complicated, but it's good to mention it. Now, in the process of technology transfer, we have to recognize the basic dynamics of the researcher perception, for whom it's science, and for the researcher, he is making an invention. The market, on the other side, they perceive it as technology. The invention they perceive is innovation, and they have a different perspective on the market, as we will see in the next slide. The difference in mindset that we recognize here is the role of the bridging of that the TTOs are supposed to do to bridge the perception of the researcher and match it with the perception of the market in a successful way. So provide the bridge that the title of this presentation mentioned. In the process, we can see the differences in terms of skills, let's say, from the researcher to the market. And the researcher looks at the skills required is on the technical side of it and the possibilities from that technical side, and whether it's truly innovative or not. And and whereas from the market side, the introduction of a new product to the market is an purely economic consideration. Similarly, on the risk of credibility and missed opportunities, but the market invests money and they have different priorities. The objective usually here is one technology, whereas in the market, they are dealing with different offerings. The purpose is of a scientist is to increase the scientific prestige and maybe some economic benefit. Here it's purely economic, the scope. And the duration, this is medium to long term, whereas is short-term considerations. And that brings us to the financing of technology transfer projects and going straight to some definitions, because I find that definitions are required in this thing, because in economic terms, we have very common misconceptions. Seed capital is primarily public funding for proof of concept. They're small money just to make a very raw prototype or something to prove that the concept of the idea that the researcher had can possibly go to the market. So this is the smallest type of funding requirement, and it's a very early stage by definition. The three F's, family, friends, and fools, are own money, are private money invested in an idea at a very early stage before more serious investors come in. And intermediate in terms of size and seriousness is business angels. This comes from the theater in Broadway. They were calling angels those that they were financing, the new plays of, the famous divas of the time. Anyways, the angel became a business angel, and they are individual investors with sector experience. Usually, they invest in sectors that they have experience in. They are usually people that they went into their pension, but still young enough to play with a sector and participate. And they go into startups with equity participation. They buy into startups. They help them for a few years, and then they go out, hopefully, with a gain, with some profits. A more important and serious for innovations that they have real potential is venture capital funds. These are funds specially made to invest in innovation. They know the challenges, they know the risks, and they invest substantially with startups. They have equity participation, and they provide mentoring and network support. They normally require that there is IP protection at that point, because they are like bankers. They are people evaluating an investment, and they want to be protected and not their boss to come back and say, why didn't you protect our investment? So here, IP protection is probably a common thing. And then we go to commercial bank and stock exchange whenever the the technology is advanced enough for the market. Now, the financial contribution to an innovation is different in different stages. And as you can see, in the early stages, we have low funds requirement. Public funding is a big part of it in the universities is done, and that's what we're talking about mostly. And that's to to identify and verify the innovation, to do maybe some IP protection, to identify the opportunities, to provide, to design the applications, and then go to the development stage where prototype development, business plans, and marketing. At this point, you have business angels and seed capital coming in. When it's bigger, business angels and VCs come in, and at the end, we have more commercial funding. The lesson to be taken from here, from this thing, is that different levels require different investment requirements, and that is where ownership of investment can be diluted for the benefit to the new investor and at the expense of the percentage of ownership of the initial developer of the innovation. A very important another aspect is to understand in the whole value chain that there is a point where public funding can make an innovation, but if this innovation is not able enough to identify or prove that there is a future value in this innovation, then, and in other words, find investment either in business angels or VCs or whatever, then there is a valley of death, as they call it, and that's where the innovation dies. The idea dies because it didn't prove itself to be valuable enough to get funding from the funding parties. This is a very common thing, as any professor will be honest enough to tell you that not all innovations are going ahead. And even if they go, there is a big risk along the way until you reach the commercialization stage. Now, the next point would be to show the different ways of that innovation resolves the problems of funding and of bridging, of increasing its chances to go to the market. One concept is a closed model innovation. Usually that means that the innovation is developed within the entity of the producers, be it a company or a university. And that university is taking upon itself to develop the technology and take it to the market. Even companies don't do that effectively because there is a lot of challenges in the research, in the development, and the commercialization sectors of the technology transfer process. And the amount of money that, as we said before, is required. So this is an old, close-minded, if you call it, if I can call it, way of channeling innovation to the market. The more modern one is where you have the entity that produces the ideas that can trade. We mentioned that before also. They can trade to somebody else a technology that was produced inside it, and that's normally what the universities are deemed to do because they don't have the development capacities within the university, and certainly they don't have the commercialization capacities. So there is a trade between producers and users or potential users, and one can sell the technology to another one who will further develop it to take it to the market. So this is a concept of open innovation, and this is being used in it's more apparent than the closed model. And then we go to our technology transfer office to put a frame on what is required from it. Even though Ms. Pagnotidou mentioned some functions that it does, the first and foremost, in my understanding, is that the TTOs have to understand the nature and dynamics of innovation creation. That's why I use the previous slides to identify, the components, idea generation and opportunity recognition, and what affects these things, because the TTO is instrumental even from that stage. Second is to familiarize the technology transfer process and its dynamics, which means that the second and third segments of our previous slides. The third is to acquire the required competencies to support innovation creation and technology transfer. That includes training, cataloging of technologies produced in the institution, mapping the corresponding markets, funding support for the early stages of the innovation and technology transfer processes, and intellectual property support mechanisms. The fourth is to provide extroversion leadership, planning and forward activities connecting with the related markets, because the market needs to be told about the new opportunities that they exist. The market is always open for new offers, and marketing ways, tactics, and policies can accelerate the process of this knowledge by the market, providing that the TTO is able to perform them. The fifth one is to establish sufficient networks and alliances to facilitate the necessary market reach, and six, to provide continuous and effective presence in the long run. That's where we have an issue, especially in Greece, that this is not working like that in Greece. Ever since I've started seeing it from the 90s to now, technology transfer offices, they are funded, they stop, they start again, they're funding until the funding finishes, and then they stop, and then they start again. This is not a way of building all the previous competencies and doing all that, because you need to have institutional knowledge in the TTO for the university and for the technology transfer process itself in order to be effective. It's not a public person's, usual employment. Is a very dynamic one, challenging, and you need to know the two markets, the producers of technology and the users of technology, and how this can be interacted. So continuous and effective presence is a must for a technology transfer office to be effective. Now, the TTO for the students, they can, there is training to be done for entrepreneurship, provide boot camps that they promote new ideas, startup support if there is such a need, and participation in technology transfer projects. This is a very good way that the students get involved with companies in the market, so they get to understand how the market works and the economies that they might not know from the studies. For faculty and research, it's the work is information on funding opportunities. Most of them, they do it. Support for funding grants, seed capital for proof of concept, technology promotion, networking,
Πάλι
and
προσωπικό.
events and meetings. Pardon? For its own staff, ZTO needs to do training, connect with the ASTP, the Association of Science and Technology Professionals in Europe, the TTOs. There is a network for TTOs in Europe, and to connect with experts whenever needed and wherever they need, like lawyers and consultants. Now, here is a separate, a clear distinction between the market of the private sector and the market as public and social sector. In that sector, you have individual companies, chambers of commerce, business associations, business parks, development agencies uh, that can interact with and provide technology push activities and obtain technology pull insights so that the university can create new opportunities, new technologies from these insights. Similarly, with the public and social sector, public organizations, social organizations, and social innovation projects, they are also potential users of technology push. In other words, technologies that are produced in the university that they can go to them, or they can provide problems and needs that they can be a source of understanding of needs for the university and the university to provide solutions. The network of technology transfer office, in terms of horizontal collaborations, it's the other TTOs. There is a big benefit if comparing good practices with other universities, research institutions, and regional TTO networks, as they are now in Greece and in other places of Europe. The European TTOs is advisable to connect and participate in ASTP events and training courses. Now, for technologies to go to the market, technologies can be useful in multiple sectors. Software can be used in the heritage, let's say, sector, and at the same time can be used in the retail sector. So there is always a wider potential for the TTO dealing with products that they target multiple sectors. There are several channels, though. There are varying applications. There is complicated process because you're talking about different applications for different uses. And then there is a lot of challenge for the technology transfer office. And of course, multiple focuses because we're talking about multiple sectors using similar products such as software. Single sector is a little easier that we have multiple companies, similar needs, multipliable applications. Imagine that there is a solution for the municipalities in a region. If it's good for one municipality, chances are that this process can be multiplied and go to the other municipalities very easy because if one application is successful in one, chances are that it will be successful in another, providing that there is no better alternative, of course. It's a simpler process and it's easier to focus. And the important thing is that single sector networking is multipliable. It from one can go to the other, especially in cases where the players are not competitive with themselves. Now, in order to be facilitated, the networking should go through some intermediaries, the local development agencies, chambers of commerce, business associations, and business parks. And last is a few tools and guides that the technology transfer office can be helped in order to bridge this gap. And one is the technology readiness level, which is a well understood and established way of separating the three major segments of a products of an innovations or a technologies uh, readiness trip from research to development to deployment. This is, purely on the technology level. On the university level, this is university, but also it can have collaborations with the market, and this is mostly market players that take up all these three last steps to deployment, to commercialization. Another way of looking at the technology readiness level is, as publicized by European Innovation Council, is the same 9 steps, now 10 steps, from the idea to basic research to, and they separate it in 4 ways. The essence is the same. The definition is a little bit different, but essentially the same. From the idea, go to prototype and check the effectiveness of the technology. Then you go to validation in demonstration, in demonstration opportunities in lab and in the field. And then you have the production, which is a purely commercial utilization. Another tool is the business readiness level, which is a similar, parallel um, method of evaluating the business readiness levels for each technology, not from the technical side, but from the business side of the of the technology. And these two have the same, as you see, levels from 1 to 9. A very important tool for the business, for the TTO, is the business model canvas. It's well established in the knowledge and understanding of startups and everybody actually, and is a very nice tool to conceptualize the whole technology perspective, the technology potential from the beginning to the end. And it starts with a value proposition, which means why this is good or better than any existing other technology. And then you go to check all the other uh, components of it, which is from the production side or the targeting side for who and how and through what channels. And then you have the money side, which is the cost and the revenue streams. This is a whole, it's a method well thought and easy to understand because it's segmented and smartly placed. Another way, of course, of doing the value proposition, more analytical, is the value proposition canvas, where the new technology and those that they produce it, they position themselves in the value map here in terms of what they resolve. I mean, what problems they solve, or what new usefulness they provide, and how, and compare it to the custom segment where you have to recognize the gains that you will apply and the pains that you will relieve, and look at what the customer is required to do in order to use your technology. So you have an easy way, a tool, in other words, to identify all the components related to the commercialization of your idea, and you can help yourself in designing the process. Last but not least are good practices that they have been for technology transfer offices. I got that from ASTP. It's a publication of UNICO, the Union of Technology Transfer Offices of UK. But even they published very good guides, and they provide practical guides for all the aspects of the technology transfer office. The unfortunate thing is that they also, the Unico, this thing does not exist anymore, and it became private, and somebody got the rights, and they're selling now their knowledge in the market, not as an association of the TTOs of UK, but as a private concern. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open of any questions if there are any.